This video is brought to you by CyberGhost VPN.
Life in prison for a Mexican cartel assassin.
See you all in hell, Julie. Remember that. Every one of y'all. See you in hell.
I should have killed you, bitch. I should have killed the bitch ass. Everybody knows you're alive. Everybody knows you're alive, huh?
When you work for the devil, it's hell to pay. And for these top brutal cartel members, the toll for their sins became a haunting symphony. So join us as we take a look at 10 cartel members reacting to their life sentences and a fate befitting their crimes. Number 10. El Chapo. What you just saw is the face of a man who's responsible for the death of over 1,000 people, bursting into tears as he realizes he'll be spending the rest of his life incarcerated in the US. There's no drug lord more fitting to start this list than Mexico's version of Pablo Escobar, El Chapo. El Chapo, real name Joaquin Archibaldo Guzman Lora, is not just a drug lord, but was also the leader of the most sophisticated drug cartel in all of Mexico, the Sinaloa Cartel. Born on April 4, 1957, in abject poverty, El Chapo was abused as a kid by his father. His father was a cattle rancher by day and a drug dealer by night, and despite physically abusing El Chapo, he indulged his son to help him trade some marijuana on the streets. However, after El Chapo did the actual work of selling these drugs, his father would squander the profits on everything apart from his family. So to support his mother and brother, El Chapo and a few of his cousins decided to grow their own marijuana plantation. But for reasons we don't know, El Chapo was sent out of his home by his father. This led him down the deep dark path of the narcotics underworld. He found himself working with the Guadalajara cartel, where he was in charge of their narcotics shipments. What made El Chapo stand out was the fact that he made room for zero error. If a shipment was delayed or if it encountered any difficulties, he'd shoot the sicario responsible for that in the head himself. Now this caught the eye of Felix Gallardo, one of the biggest drug lords in Mexico at the time. However, after Gallardo's arrest, El Chapo founded the Sinaloa Cartel, along with other notable drug lords in 1987. And from there, El Chapo took over the streets of Mexico, navigating the distribution of cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, fentanyl, cannabis, and MDMA into the United States. He's said to have shipped more drugs into the US than any other drug lord in history. Now, what made him stand out is that he attained this height by doing things no one has ever done, and that's the use of underground tunnels to move a certain portion of his shipments. Now, the more El Chapo grew, the more he became a wanted man in Mexico. He was arrested twice, in 1993 and in 2014. However, El Chapo was able to escape the hands of the authorities twice. But in the final attempt to bring him to justice, El Chapo was arrested for the third time in 2016 and extradited to the US. He's now serving multiple life sentences in the most secure US prison, the ADX Florence. Number 9. Jeremy Christian. That was Jeremy Christian, a member of a white supremacist group called the Ku Klux Klan, or KKK. The US government considers the Triple K a subversive terrorist organization, and there's good reasons why that's so. Their major targets are African Americans, Hispanics, Jews, Latinos, Asian Americans, and Catholics, as well as immigrants, leftists, and homosexuals. There have been 3 chapters of this clan, with each chapter carrying out a different level of brutality against its targets. They murder, bomb, vandalize, and use hate speech to suppress their victims as they push to uphold what they call white supremacy. Now, Jeremy Christian, a KKK member, was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of 2 passengers on a MAX train, whom he stabbed to death in May 2017. Jeremy was verbally abusing 2 underage teenage girls, one who was African American and the other who was an immigrant from Somalia. According to a witness,
Christian unleashed a violent torrent about Muslims, Christians, Jews dying, and spoke of beheadings before shouting, "Go home, we need Americans here."
Then a commuter named Namke Mechi took out his phone to record what was going on, but Jeremy didn't want this. so he snatched his phone, threw it to the ground, and smashed it with his shoe. This obviously led to a fight between the two where Jeremy pulled out a knife, stabbing Namkai Mechi and a 53-year-old man standing by the side named Ricky Best to death. Now this man must have been going for the Oscar, because at the initial stages of his trial, he appeared to be sober and tearing up at the thought of what he'd done. But it was all a charade to get this judge emotionally attached to his side of the story. And maybe it would have worked, but after his outburst towards the same African-American girl he abused on the train, it was clear this man didn't belong in society. He threatened her, called her a hoe, and said he wished he'd killed her.
I should have killed you, bitch. I should have killed you, bitch. Everybody knows you're alive.
That was all the judge needed to see, handing Jeremy Christian a life sentence without the possibility of parole.
Just expressing himself, that's him, an angry white racist.
Number 8. Marciano Vasquez.
A former member of the Zeta drug cartel said he witnessed 70 to 80 executions carried out by the Zetas in Mexico. Gilberto Rodriguez was testifying against Marciano Vasquez, a man the government says was a major player in the cartel.
80. That's very low compared to the real number of people Vasquez executed during his service to the cartel. March 18, 2015, Vasquez and a group of sicarios abducted about 300 people in a remote Mexican village, and then ordered the killing of at least half the abductees. Oh, and what about the 2013 incident, where he set a 6-year-old girl on fire and made her parents watch her burn to death? Then he burnt her mother and then her father, technically wiping out an entire family in a single day. Vasquez was a regional leader of Los Zetas. If you've heard of Los Zetas, you know that these guys are one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in Mexico and are capable of things we can't even comprehend. I'm talking about decapitating their victims, cannibalism, disemboweling their body parts, and feeding their victims to wild animals. The leader of Los Zetas at the time was called El Verdugo, which means the executioner. This should paint a picture of just how brutal these guys were. So back to Vasquez. He was the guy who had the balls to do anything he was told to do, and was also the guy who ordered sicarios around. He was also involved in some dirty business of the organization, allegedly working hand in hand with two prominent Mexican politicians, Humberto Morera and his brother, Ruben Morera. Then Vasquez coordinated the drug trafficking routes used by the organizations in Coahuila by greasing almost every palm with a few dollar bills to ensure Los Zetas shipments went through without any issues. But his story doesn't end there. From drug trafficking and arms dealing to the illicit sales of pornography and human trafficking, Vasquez dipped his hands in about everything. Between 2009 and mid-2015, Vasquez brutally murdered about 30 different individuals in cold blood. However, he was arrested on July 15, 2015, and was given 7 life sentences on numerous charges. No cell phones or cameras were allowed in the courtroom during his sentencing. But what we saw in the images after was Vasquez having his head down, grieving about the fact that he would be locked behind bars for the rest of his life.
24-year-old Marciano Vasquez was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences today in federal court. The member of the Los Zetas drug cartel was convicted on a number of counts, including murder, conspiracy, and drug charges.
So while you may not have to watch out for El Chapo, that doesn't mean you're safe in every aspect. Hackers and malicious websites are always on the hunt, and without a solid VPN, you'll be at risk of them stealing your data, credit cards, or maybe even looking at you through your webcam right now. So a huge shout out to this video's sponsor, CyberGhost VPN. Because with them, all your traffic goes through a secure VPN tunnel, meaning your IP address and all your data would be encrypted, and that'll effectively say bye-bye to all those scammers. CyberGhost VPN has more than 38 million users and 5 stars on Trustpilot, so it's definitely one of the best VPNs on the market. And with their strict no-logs policy, no one, not El Chapo or even CyberGhost, will know about your online activity. product's super easy to use, and in just a few clicks, you can access geo-restricted content from websites, YouTube included, social media networks, go and find better deals online, play games blocked in your region, protect your identity by keeping your data encrypted, and even blocked libraries of over 40 streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, and many more. Their subscription comes with a 45-day money-back guarantee, 24/7 customer support, so it's literally a no-brainer. Not only that, they've hooked us up with the best deal ever for you guys. A whopping 84% off. That's just $2.03 a month, plus 4 months free. So click on that link in the description to keep your identity and data free from any malicious attacks, and thanks to CyberGhost, the best VPN out there, for sponsoring this video. And now let's get back to our video. Number 7. Caius Viovis.
Yeah, I'll see you all in hell, too. You remember that. Every one of you, I'll see you in hell.
That's Caius Viovis, not particularly a cartel member, but he is a member of the motorcycle club known as Hells Angels. Now, Hells Angels was founded on March 17, 1948 in Fontana, California, when several small motorcycle clubs in the U.S. agreed to merge. However, while they might look like an innocent club on the outside, these guys have been associated with different federal criminal offenses, from drug trafficking to prostitution operations. In May 2019, a court in Utrecht, Netherlands, issued a verdict completely banning the Hells Angels from their country. Even in Germany, certain chapters of the club have been banned, with a judge saying that they're
a danger to public order and the rule of law.
However, members of this club still affirm that they aren't into organized crime and are only motorcycle enthusiasts who have joined to ride motorcycles together. Well, we can't say whether that's true or not, but let's take the case of Caius Viovis as a case study. Caius was born and raised in Pittston, Pennsylvania, where he lived with his adopted parents. He was also a very troubled kid, and once apprehended by law enforcement for possessing a double-bladed assault-style knife. This earned him probation for about a year, but that didn't change anything about young Caius. In fact, it only made it worse. For the next couple of years, he was transferred in and out of different hospitals for substance abuse, alcohol, heroin, and mushrooms. He even assaulted a staffer on one occasion. And it gets worse. Caius altered his facial appearance. He got implants that looked like horns on his forehead, green bones tattooed on his fingers, and the number 666 written in between the implants. He then called himself a vampire and a Satanist. Oh, and by the way, his real name isn't Caius Viovis. It's actually Roy Gutfinski Jr. However, during his bodily transformation, he legally changed his name to Caius, making reference to the vampire character in the Twilight series, and Viovis, a Roman god that myths say escaped from hell. Like, at this point, it might have been obvious the guy was losing his mind, but nothing was working for him. Then the tipping point of his crimes came in August 1999, when he and his 17-year-old girlfriend at the time took a razor and sliced the back of another 16-year-old girl. What's worse is that they licked the blood off that razor, and the wound from the cut resulted in 32 stitches. Now, the legal case that earned him his life sentence was one in 2014 that alleged his involvement in the murder of 3 men: David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell. He was charged with murder in the first degree, kidnapping, and witness intimidation. Caius and his attorney tried painting him as an innocent man, but the judge and jury weren't buying it. So he was found guilty of all charges and was sentenced to life imprisonment. And this was his reaction.
Yeah, I'll see you all in hell, too. You remember that. Every one of you, I'll see you in hell.
Number 6. Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. Felix Gallardo was one of the very few men that began the trade in narcotics in Mexico. Born on January 8, 1946, Gallardo grew up in Bella Vista, Culiacan, and unlike other drug dealers, he didn't grow up in abject poverty. He went to high school and continued to college, where he studied business. Now, after college, he joined the Mexican Federal Judicial Police Agency, and then became the personal bodyguard for the then governor of Sinaloa, Leopoldo Sanchez Solis, where he made a few connections with high-profile politicians to start up a drug trafficking organization. He founded the Guadalajara Cartel in the 70s and worked closely with a few Colombian cartels to get his narcotic shipments. At his prime, the Guadalajara Cartel was raking in $5 billion annually. But their problems and eventual fall came with the appearance of one man. His name, Enrique Kiki Camarena. Mr. Camarena was a DEA agent who began investigating the affairs of the cartel in the 80s. Then, after getting close to a few members of Gallardo's organization, he got intel on the cartel's marijuana plantation and further intel on the relationship a few low-tier politicians had in the drug trade and shipment to the U.S. Camarena then informed the Mexican federal government about his findings, leading to the raid of Gallardo's plantation. This obviously made him angry, so on February 7, 1985, he ordered the kidnap of Camarena and his helicopter pilot as they were about to leave the U.S. Consulate General in Guadalajara. They were then taken to a remote location where they were tortured for 30 hours at a stretch. Of course, taking such levels of torture can kill a man, and the truth is, it did. After 48 hours at the hands of Gallardo and his men, Mr. Camarena and his innocent pilot were killed. Their bodies were dropped by the roadside, but were later found by members of the Mexican Authority. As you might have guessed, their deaths sparked outrage in the United States, with the U.S. government demanding the Mexican government arrest everyone involved. However, this was a tad bit of a problem because Gallardo had the government under his payroll, so there was no way they were turning him in. But after intense pressure, the Mexican government had to turn him in. He was arrested at his house in Guadalajara, still wearing his bathrobe. He didn't fight back, and there was no need for weapons, which I think was quite strange. When he got to the station, his reaction was emotionless. It seemed like a perfect blend of guilt and nonchalance. Just see for yourself. He was sentenced to 40 years imprisonment. However, he was granted house arrest in September 2022. Number 5. Jorge Eduardo Costilla Sanchez. That right there is the stiff reaction of Costilla Sanchez on his extradition to the United States. When you think of the greatest drug lords of all time, a few names come to mind, but no one ever thinks of this man, Jorge Eduardo Costilla Sanchez, who was arguably more ruthless than some of the greatest drug lords you can think of. Born on August 1, 1971, in the state of Tamaulipas, Mexico, Costilla started off as a regular municipal worker before gaining insight into the drug trade from a few friends. Then in the late 90s, he became friends with the then leader of the Gulf Cartel, Ociel Cardenas, who indoctrinated him into the cartel and made him one of the high-ranking members due to his sheer enthusiasm for violence. However, along the line of making the cartel's drug trafficking business a success, Costilla and Cardenas stumbled upon two DEA spies who came down to their territory to monitor their cartel's operations. They wanted to kill these agents, but the agents reminded them of the consequences of killing a U.S. citizen and a federal agent. They thought about it and decided to let these men live, but they still faced the consequences, as on March 14, 2003, Cardenas was arrested during a shootout with the Mexican armed forces. The power of the cartel was then shifted to Costilla, who decided to partner with Cardenas' brother, Antonio Guillen, along with a few other drug lords. But believe me when I say that these men turned the Gulf Cartel into a civil war with their constant power tussle and disagreement. It was during this time that the Zetas broke out of the cartel and went on to start a revolution against its former leaders. This was one of the bloodiest wars in Mexican history, and everything eventually caught up with Costilla, as he was arrested on September 12, 2012, in a small neighborhood in Tampico. It was like he knew what was coming, because he didn't struggle or resist during arrest. And before this arrest, not many people knew who he was, or what he even looked like. Only 2 of his photos were out there. However, in 2015, he was extradited to the United States and handed a life sentence that clearly made him feel regret. Number 4. George Kaval Thomas. That's the facial expression of a man who had just been handed 7 life sentences. It's pretty shocking, right? Well, not so much, because George wasn't any ordinary cartel member or drug lord. Instead, he was the leader of the 28's gang, a fraction of arguably the biggest gang in Africa, the Numbers Gang. The Numbers Gang originated in South Africa as a prison gang, but soon after spread throughout the country and branched into fractions. The 28s are regarded as the bloodline of the gang, and they're responsible for carrying out the killings and executions of rival gang members. To prove their worthiness to be in this fraction, members must show a certain level of brutality towards victims. And if they don't, they join the lowest fraction of the gang where they'd be molested till they showed a level of toughness. It doesn't take much to realize that George must have been a brutal man, heading such a deadly group. He and his men killed anything and anyone who dared to step in their path. They operated primarily in Western Cape Town, but this was also the area where George was arrested on 55-count charges, including 7 for murder. He was placed in solitary confinement, but even during confinement, it said that he received more than 33,000 cell phone calls as he continued ordering the execution of different rival gang members. One of his victims was Curtis Esterhuizen. The 28s attempted to kill Curtis 6 different times but failed. Curtis was to testify against George in court, and George wanted all of them dead. This was because his lawyer was trying to paint him as an upstanding citizen who didn't smoke, had a bank account, and made a living from selling fish. However, the judge wasn't buying this lie. He handed Kaval 7 life sentences, 1 for each first-degree murder he was charged with. On the other hand, George wasn't bothered. I mean, just take a look at this guy. However, after spending a few years in prison, his orientation changed to this.
But what I know for a fact, if I could have changed some things, I wouldn't be here where I'm now.
Well, what can you say? I guess the harsh life in prison finally got to him. Number 3. Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela. If you ever wondered who took over the cocaine market after the death of Pablo Escobar in 1993, then here's your answer. Mr. Orejuela, aka El Ajedrecista, or the chess player, who was a Colombian drug lord and co-founder of the famous Cali Cartel. The Cali Cartel and Medellin Cartel were in direct competition when Pablo Escobar was still alive. But after his death, the Cali Cartel moved into their territories, claiming both their manpower and a few of their assets. They were also responsible for sending Escobar's family away from Colombia due to the death threats they issued them. At its peak, the Cali Cartel was supplying 80% of the cocaine shipped into the US and 90% in the European market. However, after barely 2 years on top, the Cali Cartel fell, and it came with the arrest of Gilberto Orejuela. June 9, 1995, Gilberto was arrested by the Colombian National Police during a house raid in Cali. When the cops had searched the house several days earlier, he hid in a hollowed-out bathroom cabinet with an oxygen tank and wasn't seen. However, he was later captured and sentenced to 15 years in prison, which he only served 7 years. Some say it was due to his connections. Others say it was just a thing of luck. But none of it mattered when Gilberto was recaptured by Colombian authorities in Cali back in 2004. He was immediately extradited to the US and was sentenced to 30 years imprisonment on charges of conspiring to import cocaine to the US. Now, there isn't any official footage from his court proceedings, but from his reaction after being extradited to the US, you can almost tell this man was living in regret. While incarcerated, Gilberto submitted numerous applications for an early release due to the litany of chronic illnesses he had suffered, some of which included cancer. However, his applications were denied, and the federal district judge, Federico Moreno, who rejected these applications, released a statement stating,
There are no extraordinary and compelling grounds to support the application. The court is totally unwilling to undermine and undo such public respect for the law. as well as the gravity of the offenses committed. His criminal record is so repugnant that there is no way he could effectively cut his sentence in half.
After numerous rejections for an early release, Gilberto died at a prison medical center in Butner, North Carolina on May 31st, 2022 at the age of 83. Number 2. Abel Gallegos.
As you're let out of the courtroom to serve the rest of your life in prison.
In 2018, a mother of 2 daughters, Simone Duran, met a 36-year-old guy on social media who went by the name Abel Candy Gallegos. The two got talking and then decided to have a physical meeting at a house in Denver with another man, Rene Francisco Rosales, and a few other people. Now, we don't know why exactly Duran decided to meet up with these people, but whatever the reason was, it was the worst decision she ever made, and she paid dearly for it. After spending some time in the house, Duran, Gallegos, and Rosales left the house together, but Rosales took another route to his house. Left alone with Duran, Gallegos lured her to a parking lot at W. Colfax and Kipling, where he had previously arranged to meet with another of his gang members, simply identified as Quintana. And that's where the real story begins. Gallegos and Quintana began assaulting Duran and stuffed her in the back of a car before they drove her to a dark, secluded spot within the area. When they got there, they took her out of the vehicle, shot her 10 times, and left her lifeless body laying in a pool of her own blood. Quintana and Gallegos then fled the scene. However, they came back to pour gasoline and burn her body to ashes. Now, the crazy twist to this story is that Gallegos was arrested on November 20th, 2018 for an unrelated crime, but it was later tied to the murder of Duran. Gallegos was also on federal probation at the time of the crime, had also been revoked from probation 8 times, and it was his 6th felony conviction. Like, this guy was an animal, and the judge didn't hide his feelings when he said this.
I am struck by the casualness in which it was committed, the absolute disregard for human life.
Then he noted that Gallegos didn't deserve to be among society, and handed him his sentence.
This is where you will end up, with your family and friends crying as you're let out of the courtroom to serve the rest of your life in prison.
And number 1, Pedro Espinoza.
Defendant Pedro Espinoza shall be put to death within the walls of the California State Prison at San Quentin.
Emotionless. That's usually the facial expressions of 18th Street members when they receive their court sentence. In this case, the video you just saw is the face of Pedro Espinoza, a member of the said gang who killed a high school athlete for carrying a red backpack. The victim, Jamil Andre Shaw, II, was a junior at Los Angeles High School. He played football, basketball, baseball, the piano, and ran track. He was a prodigy with a bright future ahead of him. He had his parents guiding him at every step of the way, with his mother, Anita Shaw, serving her 2nd tour in Iraq at the same time of his death. The killer, Pedro Espinoza, was born in 1989 and was an illegal immigrant to the U.S. He had his first run-in with the law in 2007 when he was arrested on gun charges and assault on a police officer. But the biggest mistake made was that Espinoza was given a 4-month early release from jail on March 1st, 2008, despite the fact that the police department knew he was an illegal immigrant. I know it sounds crazy and weird, and it gets worse. 8:40 p.m. on March 2nd, 2008, 2 Hispanic men jumped out of a white car, confronted Shaw, and asked him what gang he belonged to. One of the men was Pedro Espinoza, while young Shaw was on his way home from the Beverly Center. He was literally 3 blocks away from his house when he got confronted. Espinoza and his fellow gang member asked Shaw what gang he belonged to, because they saw him carry a Spider-Man backpack and assumed he was a member of their rival Bloods gang, which is associated with the color red. Shaw, who was stunned by this confrontation, couldn't speak, and he was shot dead on the spot. His dad heard that gunshot all the way from the house and called Shaw to warn about the area. But how could you know it was your son being the actual victim? When his son didn't answer his phone, the father ran outside and found him, staying by his side until medical personnel arrived. He was then taken to a hospital, where he was pronounced dead at 9:55 p.m. As for Espinoza, this was just his first day out of prison, so it didn't take long before he was recaptured and charged with first-degree murder. And after 4 years of legal proceedings, Espinoza was sentenced to death on May 23, 2012.
The defendant, Pedro Espinoza, shall be put to death within the walls of the California State Prison at San Quentin in the manner prescribed by law upon a date to be fixed by this court in a warrant of execution.
From the depths of darkness to the crescendo of retribution, these cartel members and gangsters experienced a dance with destiny unlike any other. And as their stories intertwined with poetic justice, it's almost amusing how they almost couldn't deal with the same pain they put many innocent civilians through. Be sure to click the link in the description to get that limited discount CyberGhost VPN has offered for all you guys. Take a stance and protect your data while browsing all your favorite geo-restricted content for just $2.03 per month.